joining us on this very sunny evening. And thank you for bearing with us, because we were meant to have this conference last month, but something called the Tory leadership election got in the way, hence why we're doing it a little bit later. But thank you for joining us for this Bright Blue and Barnardo's conference called Left to Their Own Devices: Young People, Social Media and Mental Health. Bright Blue, we are an independent think tank for liberal conservatism. One of our key research themes is social reform, and we're particularly interested in the experiences of younger people, younger adults, and particularly around mental health and the experiences that young people have around mental health and the services that they can access. We're very grateful to Barnardo's for partnering with us on this conference today, and particularly to their team, Debbie, Sarah, and the rest for their help in bringing this event together. Just some house rules to begin. The toilets are 2 floors down, and if we need to have an emergency exit, which I'm very hopeful won't happen, but if it does happen, then the emergency exit is where we came in for the conference. So it's the entrance. So you go down 1 flight of stairs and then out towards the main entrance. Of course, it's about social media. So if you are using social media, which I hope you are, then the Wi-Fi for here, because I know the signal's not great, is 10-11 CHT, and the password is hospitality. And if you're using a hashtag to tweet far and wide about the conference, please use the hashtag left to own devices. And our Twitter handle is @WeAreBrightBlue, and Barnardo's is much easier to remember. That's @Barnardo's. So today's conference this evening, we're going to start with a panel session with some experts, practitioners and young people to talk about their experiences and their ideas on how we can tackle some of the challenges as well as embrace some of the positives. And then we're going to have a quick break and move on to the Barnardo's annual lecture, which is being delivered by the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. And then we're going to have some drinks. So please do stick around right to the end for drinks. We'd be very grateful if you did that and joined us in conversation and networking. So new technologies and the internet have transformed the way adults, and especially children, live their lives, how they learn, communicate, socialize, and express their views. Much of this is positive, enabling greater information sharing and social capital. But there has been growing concerns, particularly in recent years, alongside an emerging evidence base that social media may have a negative impact on children and young people's mental health, particularly if it is overused. And so this conference really is a platform to explore the positive and negative impacts of social media on young people and discuss and champion solutions to one of the most pressing challenges I think young people face today. So we're going to start the conference, before we go on to the panel discussion, with a film from some young people. So I'm hoping that this comes through.
Hi, my name's Catherine and I'm 19 years old, and I want to talk to you today about social media. The best thing about social media is I'm able to connect with my friends instantly.
Hi, my name is Maria, and the best thing about social media is staying connected with my friends and being able to talk to them and staying up to date with them.
Hi, my name's Angela. I think the best thing about social media is that it enables us to communicate with our friends more easily. On social media, I feel as if I'm part of a wider community.
Hi, my name is Malika Thomas. I think that the best thing about social media is that it inspires me in my style and in my studies and things like that.
Hi, I'm Joseph Wilson. I'm an apprentice at Barnardo's. I think the best thing about social media is it brings people together no matter where they are in the world.
However, being on social media often brings up a mixture of feelings. On the one hand, it's great to feel connected to the outer world. However, there's often feelings of competitions where I find myself comparing myself to others and often feeling inferior.
I think the worst thing about social media is that we often share too much information on it and forget that it's out there forever.
I often find myself comparing my life to others on Instagram, and this can make me not feel good enough.
The worst thing about social media is mixing up appearance versus reality and ending up falling in a world of perfectionism that's not true to our reality.
People that want to bully will go there and find people to bully, which isn't the best, especially for younger people.
I think that the worst thing about social media is that it can be addictive. But I think that the government should do things like ask for proof of age and proof of identity when setting up things like Facebook accounts, because there is a lot of impersonation and I don't think that's right.
One thing the government could do is create more barriers and reduce harmful exposure.
They can take ideas from the younger people that actually use social media on a daily basis to find out how to make it better, how to improve it going forward.
To ensure that there's stricter controls on age, because younger children often see stuff they shouldn't on social media.
If the government could do one thing to improve social media for young people, it would be to create a policy where social media is representative of the real world.
If I could ask the government to do one thing regarding social media and young people, it would be to educate children from a young age so that they're aware of the risks and how to avoid them.
Great, thank you. So sorry for all the technical glitches at the start, but that was a fantastic video from the young people's voices about the positive and negatives. And I'm glad that Catherine has also joined us from the video, and she's going to be speaking today. So in this panel discussion, we're going to be exploring three key questions. The first is, can social media be harnessed to promote rather than damage children's mental health? Secondly, as a society, do we know how to respond to the challenges of childhood in the digital age? And thirdly, what more can government, parents, schools and services do to help keep children safe and healthy online? So each panellist will speak for 5 minutes. So on my far right is Dr. Barnardo, who is chair of the Child and Adolescent Faculty at the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And next to Barnardo is Dr. Javed Khan, who is in his 5th year as chief executive at Barnardo's. And the charity celebrated its 150th anniversary in 2016, with Javed in place as the first non-white, non-Christian CEO in the charity's history. And before that, he was a maths teacher who held management posts in various education establishments, as well as being chief executive at Victim Support. And then Catherine, who's 19 years old and has been volunteering with Barnardo's Buckinghamshire CAMS for over 2 years as a former service user who has experienced mental health issues. And she was a young ambassador for mental health at a seminar led by Baroness Massey in the Houses of Parliament, and was a highly commended champion of the year at the National Children and Young People's Mental Health Awards. So, Barnardo, over to you. You can stand up there, or you can stand up here, it's up to you. Or you can sit down, it's entirely up to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. Just by way of background, I'm the chair of the Child and Adolescent Faculty at the Royal College of Psychiatrists, but I'm a working child psychiatrist. Up until recently, I was an inpatient consultant in an inpatient unit for young people for over 10 years, where I saw many, many very distressed young people. And as well as that, I'm an academic by background too, so my particular interest is depression. So when thinking about the effects of technology and social media, hopefully I can try to bring all those strands together. So social media and mental health, it's a hugely contentious issue, and it's something that we get called to talk about constantly. I've just come back from a conference in Prague where I was asked to talk about, guess what, social media. I was due to talk at a conference this afternoon, which is cancelled, social media. At the moment, responding to another media request tomorrow, papers coming out. So it's a hugely important topic, but sometimes I do worry that the media is driving the social media agenda. And we need to sometimes pull back and think about what really affects mental health problems in young people. Social media is certainly one aspect of that, but it isn't by far and away the primary reason why young people present to mental health services. I don't see young people coming to casualty in middle of the night distress primarily because something's happened on social media. It's usually for a whole host of other reasons: trauma, abuse, and poverty, and all the associations that go with that. For example, parents with mental health problems. Those are the sorts of things that bring young people to child and adolescent mental health services at the more severe end of the spectrum where I've worked over the years. However, there's no doubt that social media has a role to play with all of this. Quite what that role is still remains hugely controversial. So as an example, we held a Royal College debate last year at our annual conference where young people chaired and managed and spoke at the debate. The first young person, they picked up their mobile phone and said, "This is my heroine. This is the heroine of young people today. I can't get off this. I can't sleep at night. I'm constantly scrolling. I'm constantly checking my likes. It's a nightmare." The other young person said, "Hang on, wait a minute. I'm 16 and this is my lifeline. I'm a looked after child. I live on my own. This is the only way I have of connecting with my family and my friends and my support networks." And therein you have that conundrum, really, of all the benefits and potential harms in one. And I guess when we see that polarity played out in the media as well, and also within the academic field. So the argument is that we don't have enough research yet in order to put boundaries in place, in order to inform government policy. And that's a hugely difficult area. And as an academic, I'm completely in support of evidence-based policy making. However, there's also such a thing called the precautionary principle. So the World Health Organization adopts that precautionary principle in terms of policies they make in regards to prevention. So the idea being if there's enough emerging evidence and the potential risks of harms escalating outweighs that of any possible harms that could be attributed to introducing policy, then the precautionary principle should be applied. And they've done this recently with very little children. So the WHO has recently said that infants under 1 should have no access to screens whatsoever, and those young children between 1 to 4 should only have 1 hour a day. So they've made quite a firm stand on that, as have quite a few other countries around the world: Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the States. We've been relatively cautious in this country. And I guess also people worry about unintended consequences, which is an important part of this debate as well. So we very much welcome the government white paper, because this is a very important conversation for us to be having for many reasons, but we also need to be thinking about unintended consequences of any actions we put in place. So for example, I'm aware of research in female jihadists on Twitter, whereby content was moderated and taken down. However, all that happened was that more virile content was displaced elsewhere. And interestingly enough, similar sorts of things have been shown to occur in families as well. So there's been a very big, European-wide project looking at social media and parenting. And what this project found was it was those parents who had open conversations and dialogues with children and young people about how to use technology and the internet. They're the ones that came out with the most balanced approaches, and the children seemed to be better protected. Whereas parents that were much more authoritarian and imposed bans, they were much like to push things in the other direction. I don't know about you, if someone tells me what to do, I get quite annoyed. So I think those are the sorts of things we need to be thinking about, how we can best as a society move things forward and help to protect our young people. Obviously, education, media literacy is hugely important, because people like me are dinosaurs compared to young people today. So it's really important our parents are educated, our educators in schools, and all adults who come into contact with children and young people. And so some of the other issues in terms of the precautionary principle. So, I've spent a lifetime, nearly 3 decades now, seeing children, young people, mental health problems. And it's certainly the case that the most vulnerable young people are the ones who, struggle the most with some of the more negative aspects on social media. And in terms of the evidence base for that, there is a growing literature. It's still not conclusive, and we've seen that from many reports. However, in clinical practice, what I see is that young people who come to us, they're feeling really depressed, their self-esteem is really low. They really struggle to be able to manage their media profiles. An anecdote I give my own son, I was talking to him a little while ago and I was asking about his friendship group. He said, I don't see them anymore. And I said, why is that? Because they're on social media all night and I don't want to do that. And then I come in the morning, I ask what's going on, they say, forget it, you're not kept up. So I don't keep in touch with them anymore. He's resilient, he can manage that. Many of the young people I see would really struggle with that because their peer group is so important to them and they don't want to feel even more isolated than they already do. So, and very much welcome the Barnardo's report, which focuses on vulnerable young people and how they can manage technology today. The other thing, just to add from clinical experience, working in inpatient units, is that the so-called contagion effect, and we've just done a paper at the Royal College talking about how sometimes admitting young people to inpatient units isn't necessarily the best way forward for that young person. And many a time I've seen young people who have been self-harming on a relatively minimal basis, but once they come into contact with other young people who have a much greater problem with that, that effect does become contagious, and you see that within school settings. And there's certainly evidence now from the research that can also happen in online communities. And so we very much welcome the white paper looking at the effects of that. In terms of the positives, hopefully we'll have more opportunity to discuss that further. So obviously there's a lot of potential to harness the good from the internet and new technologies. For example, I was at a conference recently and they were demonstrating examples of virtual reality and how taking young people into that environment online, for example, if they have social anxiety, can be hugely helpful therapeutics. They're actually being exposed to that situation, being guided with support through situations they really struggle with. So that's an area which is developing and I think has got massive potential. And then there's lots of applications which are really helpful in aiding clinical work. And there's been big studies in New Zealand, for example, where it's been shown that self-help online interventions for mild depression can be just as helpful as face-to-face contact. Having said that, of course, there are many young people who may prefer face-to-face contact or who will need additional face-to-face contact. So we can't say that digital technology is going to supplement the need for clinicians, but certainly they could work in tandem together. And a few other innovations the NHS has got. There's an NHS apps library, and also the NHS has developed digital app questions, which are really important in terms of thinking about the standards of the apps that are out there. And 5 by Rights is another organisation that's produced an excellent report thinking about the principles of care and the duties of care that we have towards our children and young people. And the first principle they talk about is the principle of parity. So there has to be a parity of rights both online and offline. At the moment we've got a huge disparity. So we've got the ridiculous situation, we've got a 9 o'clock watershed, for example, and film certification boards, and virtually nothing online. And young people have a right to know, and parents have a right to know how appropriate the content they're accessing is. So in the future, this is a massive area. There is no one simple solution. We obviously need to look at this issue in the context of the whole of society, starting with the government white paper, thinking about the really important role that technology companies have and how they need to do more to try and protect young people, and also to harness the positives. And for example, if somebody's accessing self-harm content, they should be directed immediately to self-help websites as well. And just to finish off, and in terms of the different levels, talked about literacy, but also in terms of parenting, it's really important for parents to have better digital literacy and also to model to children, young people, and demonstrate how to use technology for the best. So as a college, for example, we've been advocating tech-free meal times, and I think nudge kind of policies within the society and encouraging companies to do those sorts of things, to try and give incentives to people to change their habits are really important. So for example, Frankie's and Benny's recently introduced kids eat free if there's no screens at meal times, and that's an example of a really positive intervention which needs to be evaluated. But those are examples of where we can maybe nudge people into thinking a little bit more about what they're doing, how parents are managing their children and other situations. So on that note, I think my 5 minutes is probably up and I'll stop, but I think this is a hugely important area and I really welcome the white paper as a springboard for having a discussion as all of us, as stakeholders in society, with children, young people, on how we can move forwards. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that, Barnardo. Very, very thoughtful stuff. So, Catherine, over to you.
So I am here today representing a young person's perspective of social media. It can be difficult to talk to adults because they don't understand the impact social media has on our generation's lives. It doesn't feel like they're in touch with how influential it really is. For example, why only having a few followers or likes on Instagram may decrease a person's young self-esteem. This means that when adults and government do make changes and respond to digital challenges, they should involve young people's ideas because we are the ones that it will affect the most. Social media is a platform that everyone, particularly young people in this day and age, use. It's really good because I'm able to keep in contact with friends and find out what is going on in the world. I have also gotten to meet other young people going through similar issues with their mental health like me, which makes me feel less isolated knowing that there are people I can talk to who understand my struggles and I may not get to meet them in everyday life. However, there are a lot of negatives to social media. The main one is comparison. Social media just isn't realistic. You compare your journey, life and body to others online. And it's so easy to develop your perfect identity by spending too much time on apps that you become fixated on comparing yourself to others. Also, instant messaging means you never really switch off from people and messages can be interpreted the wrong way. Also, the content on social media needs to be monitored. So hashtags on Instagram such as self-harm and anorexia recovery and the lack of body diversity such as the perfect body figures on Love Island. There's also the danger of young people being an easy target for criminals. For example, Snapchat has a snap map which shows the location of where you are on Snapchat if it's not switched off. So what more can the government, parents and schools do to keep children safe and healthy online? We need to do more and create better laws. We need to use social media to our advantage rather than criticising it constantly. It is always going to be there and we need to utilise this. Almost every young person uses it, which means we can promote mental health awareness and destigmatise mental health conditions if done in the correct way. There needs to be more monitoring of the content on social media, such as banning self-harm posts and using more cultural diversity on Instagram feeds. Also, in schools, from an early age, children should be taught how to use social media appropriately and learn about the risks associated with it. For example, using picture books such as Watch Out or police visits from schools. It should be compulsory as part of the curriculum and supported by notifications when downloading apps to reinforce the pros and cons to help keep children safe and healthy online.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, very important contribution that and some very good ideas. And I'd be interested when we get into the Q&A to hear some more ideas from some of the young adults in the audience as well. Over to you, Jabez.
Thanks very much, Ryan. And can I just also thank you and Bright Blue for helping us pull this event together, and for everybody else that's made such an effort to come here. It's difficult to follow one great speaker, but then to follow two of them is almost impossible because they've kind of said all the things that I wanted to say. But I'm going to try not to duplicate. And it was wonderful, Catherine, by the way, for a 19-year-old to have that confidence to come and speak to such a scary audience like this. It certainly scares me. I don't know about you, but you did brilliantly. For those of you that don't know Barnardo's, by the way, Barnardo's is the oldest and largest national children's charity in the UK. As Ryan said, we've been around a long time. And we operate at a very large scale, so there's about 20,000 volunteers, 8,500 paid staff that help run over 1,000 services across the whole of the UK. And what that results in the last year, over 300,000 children, young people, parents and carers were supported by Barnardo services. That's just in the UK, and those numbers are going up. Remember, we live in a country that is the 6th largest economy in the world. And yet we have over 4 million children who are living in poverty, and those numbers are increasing every single year as well. So it's in that context that we operate. But for Barnardo's, very critically, mental health, children's mental health is a major priority. And there are many things that we do and that we need to do, but we don't call everything a priority. Mental health really is, for a whole range of reasons that you've been hearing about and that you will know about as well. But we say, and I've been very public about this, that children's mental health in this country is in crisis. And I don't use those words lightly. Or everything that we see, all the research we do, all the hands-on practical support that we give and the evidence that we've got and listening to young people, their families who are having to, in some occasions, wait 15 months before they get a child and adolescent mental health support meeting. I mean, that is just criminal. I don't know what else we can call it if we don't call it a crisis. And experts generally agree that mental health issues around the country are increasing, not decreasing, day by day. So we've got to do something about it. The starting point, I think, is to get a much better understanding of the link between social media, the internet, and mental health. We just don't know enough, really. And I don't want to repeat what Natka said earlier on, but getting the balance right between the advantages, the clear advantages that this technology offers, and the huge risks that we see as a result of it. Now, there isn't enough research out there to be unequivocal in terms of is it good or is it a bad thing. I think those are the wrong words anyway, but we need to know more. We know that social media, though, can be a huge positive for the most vulnerable young people. You know, those who have had early life trauma, for example. Those who have all sorts of challenges in their lives, as you've heard some examples already. Social media can address isolation and loneliness in very practical ways. It can help them explore their own identity in a way that they can't elsewhere. It can help them build virtual communities, which can be a lifeline for many young people. But the dangers are also very real and very, very serious. From online grooming, for example, something that Barnardo faces every day. From gaming addiction, that is also a growing challenge. And cyberbullying, something people might be a bit more familiar with in terms of hearing about the challenges. Now, I just want to talk about our report, the report that you've got in your little goodie bags that you should all have, which you can read later. This is a survey that we did of 80 frontline practitioners within Barnardo's to get a better understanding of what's going on the front line. What are the practitioners, the people who are the experts on the front line, what are they telling us? What do they see day in, day out? It's only a snapshot. It's only 80 people, but it's 80 people from the largest children's charity in the land that are telling us what they think is going on. Most research, of course, around children and young people looks at children and young people in general. All children and young people, so the various surveys that you see out there. What this research does is, because it hones in on Barnardo's practitioners and Barnardo's frontline workers who are working with Barnardo's young people, who are the most vulnerable in society, this hones in on the challenges around social media and internet for the most vulnerable. So it is very different data to what you might otherwise read, because these are young people who have already faced abuse or trauma in their lives. And we wanted to know what impact this is having on their lives. So what did we find? Well, we found that vulnerable children, firstly, we found that they are accessing social media at a far younger age than we might think. So under fives are watching YouTube, sometimes encouraged by their parents or their carers, of course, or they found it themselves, or however it's happening, but they're watching YouTube. YouTube was never designed for very young people like that, nor was any of the other social media that's out there. 5 to 10-year-olds are being exposed to harmful, inappropriate materials online. And that includes a whole range of things, which I'm sure you can guess, but it includes seriously violent pornography as well, in the hands of very, very young minds. 11 to 15-year-olds are experiencing cyberbullying. So, you know, bullying used to stop at the school gates when we were young and at school, and it was nasty, but it stopped, and then you went into the haven of your home, and you felt protected. Well, now, cyberbullying is allowing that bullying to follow them home and be with them 24 hours a day. 17 to 19-year-olds are trying to depict a perfect life. Now, Catherine was talking a minute ago about body image and what that does, particularly young females are really being affected by that. Now, children have faced these sorts of problems, always, of course. We will have done when we were young, but they were never exacerbated by being online, in some cases 24 hours a day, that 24-hour connectivity where there is no switching off, where young kids are taking smartphones, which we all buy for them because we want to do the best for our kids, and every other young person's got one in the school, so why shouldn't our children have it? And they're taking it into their bedrooms and leaving it switched on at night. And when that ping happens, you know, the one that even adults find hard to resist, how are young people supposed to resist that? And that ping, who knows what it says to them? We are allowing film crews into the bedrooms of our children to either film them and share, or share stuff that our kids should not be seeing. But there isn't enough research out there around this. This is anecdotal stuff that we are picking up. Now, at the same time, issues relating young people's mental health are growing. Of course, whether it's anxiety, depression, body image, self-esteem issues, all of that is happening. But children who have already experienced trauma, it could be neglect, it could be abuse in their early life, these kids are far more vulnerable, our research shows. According to a survey of frontline workers, then 79% said that 11 to 15-year-olds they work with had mental health well-being issues that were impacted by cyberbullying, specifically. 78% said that that age group, the 11 to 15-year-olds, had accessed unsuitable or harmful content through social media. But also 84% said that young people were able to use social media to access advice and help for mental health as well. There's also a positive used in the right way. So what do we do about this then? Well, I would argue that we've got to all work very, very hard to make and to protect the online activity that young people have at their fingertips, just like we make sure that offline activity is also safe. You know, we have zebra crossings to help people cross roads. We have play areas in parks that are beautifully designed to protect children. That's the physical stuff. But where's the protection online for them? We're just not doing enough. And we all have a role to play in this, whether it's government, whether it's think tanks, whether it's the media and how it covers this issue, whether it's the charities and communities and parents themselves have all got to pull together to try and do what needs to be done. And at Barnardo's, we're doing our bit. We're making a contribution, I think. In the last year, we supported over 32,000 children and young people through our services that target mental health support. And a lot of that was through school-based programs as well. And across our 1,000 services in total, we also provide what we call trauma-informed support to children who have experienced trauma through multiple adverse childhood experiences. It could be sexual abuse, domestic abuse with the adults around them, or living in poverty. And we're also now training all of our 8,000 plus staff to become a trauma-responsive organisation. It's a major commitment from us, and we're making it available to our volunteers as well. And as far as I know, we're the only large-scale organisation that's making that kind of commitment. But we believe it's exactly the right thing to do, because it's going to get us better to, or help us better understand how we deliver our services and what the right services are, as well as understand each other as staff better too. Now, just to summarise, our report ends with 4 key recommendations, which actually align brilliantly with what Barnardo and Catherine have already said. Firstly, research. The government needs to commission new research into the impact of social media on mental and health and well-being of young people, with a particular focus on the most vulnerable. We just need to know a lot more. We need to know what the causal effect, if any, is. Secondly, education. All children need to learn how to stay safe on social media and the internet, including those not in school, who are often the most vulnerable for all sorts of reasons. There needs to be good guidance for teachers and support workers and parents and carers too. Thirdly, mental health services themselves. We need effective prevention and early intervention in all schools. Now, the government's recently launched a green paper. There are various proposals in there which I would support, but they don't go far enough and they don't deliver fast enough. And finally, regulating the internet. Many of you will have heard government's been thinking a lot about this recently, has made some proposals, championed by Matt Hancock, who we're going to hear from later on. And if we enact those proposals, I believe, the UK will become world leaders actually in regulating the internet so it's safe for our children. But we're going to have a new Prime Minister in a matter of days. It remains to be seen whether the new Prime Minister prioritises that work. We would argue very, very strongly that it needs to be one of the top priorities so that we don't waste any more time. Stop there.
Thank you, Jan. Okay, a very powerful speech there from Javed. And just echoing your own research, Bright Blue published research last week looking at the views of young adults aged 18 to 30. And we asked them, what was if you could choose the top policy priority, what would it be? It wasn't cut taxes, cut tuition fees, stay in the EU, leave EU, even reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is obviously very important. But the top two were making housing more affordable and improving mental health care provision. They were the top two policy asks that young adults said would help young people the most. So this is definitely something which is on young adults' radars. Now, before we go into a Q&A, I just want you to introduce yourself to the person sat next to you, either side. And I just want you, if you can, just to share your views on social media, your experiences of social media, positive and negative if you want, and any ideas you have, following on particularly from what Catherine was saying, on what could improve social media experiences for people. So just 3 minutes, talk amongst yourselves. Lots of good conversations. So thank you for doing that. Right, I'm going to take some questions now, and I'm going to take them in rounds of 3. So if you put your hand up, and you could say who you are and where you're from if you want to do that. And yeah, so it could be a question to any of the panelists, or it could just be sharing your own experiences or views. So any questions from the floor? Okay, this gentleman here.
I'm Tommy.
And a microphone's coming round, so here you go.
Hi, I'm Tommy from London, Clapham, and I have a question to Catherine. Sorry. And do you think that as more millennials and younger generations who have a better understanding of social media, do you think that eventually that there's going to be more understanding between social media generations as more millennials become parents?
Okay, very, very thoughtful, articulate question. Okay, some more questions, anybody? Yes, this lady here.
Pretty much to anyone, I guess. I'm just wondering who would decide ideally what is harmful material. I'm just thinking recently with YouTube and the demonetizing of LGBT plus channels and content, I'd actually say that's potentially harmful to some of the most vulnerable children that we have. So I'm wondering how you'd really create a non-biased perspective in what is removed.
Okay, and then this lady here, please.
Hi, great speeches, everyone. Thank you. How can we govern or perhaps tackle the rise of makeup influencers? Because, I mean, one could argue that adds to the vulnerability of young people and this need to look like the influencers and so on. So, how can we govern or perhaps tackle that?
Okay, so Barnardo, maybe on that last question around influencers and the effect that they're having and whether that can be controlled.
Oh, that's a really good question. So recently the college was involved with the Advertising Standards Agency around the Love Island ads. Do you remember they had lots of ads around cosmetic surgery? And we were really concerned together with NHS England about the effects on young people's mental health. But that was successful. We had a really positive dialogue with them, and the result of that was those ads were then removed. So I think that's an example of an action that can be taken, and the Advertising Standards Agency are quite keen to work with us in order to try and look at all those sorts of effects and think about what regulation they've got in place. That's one aspect, but obviously this is much, much broader, isn't it? And there isn't a straightforward solution. I mean, I think part of it with girls is about empowering girls as well, really, isn't it? And that has to be done at multiple levels throughout society. As a female academic doctor who has sort of, seen quite a lot over the years. I remember when I went for my interview at medical school, the first question asked was, "Can you be a doctor and a mother?" And that was my first question. So I think that sort of pervades to, girls and women in our society today at every single level. It's what they're taught in education about the disparity, about the subjects called STEM subjects that girls follow. To taking action like the Advertising Standards Agency, but I don't have a straightforward answer to that, but it's an important dialogue to have. I just wanted to pick up on the influencers because something the college has talked about recently is about kiddie influencers and how very, very young children these days are up there and making a lot of money, through their parents on social media, selling toys or whatever. And again, it's back to parity. There are rules and regulations about the employment of young people, but there's no rules and regulations. And the possible pressures these children might be subjected to in terms of keeping up their own social media profiles and influences. And I guess that extends across all children, really. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Javed, I'm particularly interested in the second question around who deems content harmful, because there's a danger of subjectivity there, is there?
Yeah, I think there's a huge danger, and the problem here is, of course, as I said, that there just isn't enough research or knowledge to back up harmful, the definition of what is harmful. We, as a society, whether it's Barnardo's or any other people that have some responsibility to do something about this, we're simply treating the symptoms, right? But not the cause. We don't dig deep enough, we don't know enough really about it. And the answer to all of this, and connected to all three of these questions actually, is the research that is required, and government has got to bite the bullet and commit to some long-term research with the people that can do this, and there's lots of people out there that are very skilled, but they've got to be funded. We've got to make a commitment that we want to know more before we start making any rash decisions about, switch that off and switch that off. There's a huge risk in that because you just don't know. One person's, I think you were saying earlier, one person's kind of heroin is another person's kind of liberation. Not that I agree with the first part or in any sense by the way anybody's recording this. We do not agree with drugs. But the point is, young people view things in different lenses. And particularly, as I'm saying, those who are isolated, the connectivity is a lifesaver for them. But for others, the 24-hour connectivity is a major problem. Now, I have lots of views on the makeup question, because I get all my makeup advice online, of course, as you can tell. But, within this, I think there's also something that we often miss, and that is the voice of children and young people. As part of that research, we need to spend more time and invest more in listening to what young people are telling us, what young people like. Catherine and others, the people that Barnardo works with, and there are lots of them out there and they want to have a voice. Tommy, for example, I think would be really interesting to talk to as well. What do young people think about the risks, the dangers, the strengths, the weaknesses of the current approach? And where would they draw the line about the risks? I think that we'd learn a lot from that.
Catherine, so that first question about millennials, if and when they become parents, how their attitudes might change. Have you got any views on that?
Well, I think it's really hard to say because social media is constantly evolving, but because we've got so much more understanding, I think that will help us to know how to use social media better, so use it to promote mental health awareness, and so we'd understand what our children are saying, like if they're being cyberbullied or they get upset over the fact that they haven't got enough likes on their Instagram post, we'd understand why that would be so detrimental to their well-being. So I do think that we will become parents to social media, really.
The problem with that, though, if I might add, is that if you think ahead, say, another 10 years, and what kind of technology is going to be available.
Yeah. That's the thing, like, we don't know how social media is evolving. So SnapMap only came out like a year or something ago, and who knows what could come out next. So
I haven't even heard of SnapMap. Right.
I just have a point about harmful content. I think we need to learn globally as well, because other countries have tried doing a lot of things. So, for example, Germany, they've got regulation around taking down harmful content within 24 hours. I don't quite know what that consists of, but I think we can certainly learn from other countries on what's worked and what hasn't. And South Korea, for example, set up an internet research centre back in 2002 because they were so concerned about the effects on young people. So this needs to be a global effort, and we need to look at what works globally.
I think that's very important. Okay, next round of questions. So we'll start here. So.
Hi, I'm Jake, and my question is, if you take away the aspect of the 24-hour connectivity between like young people, their friends, etc., why would social media still be essential in the young people's lives if you take away like all the aspects of, obviously again, connectivity and obviously like celebrities, etc.?
Okay, thank you. Good question. Let's have this lady here.
Thank you. What can we do as responsible adults in society to help diminish the negative influence of social media, and how can we help Barnardo's achieve its goals?
Okay, good question. It's not always about government, but what we can do as individuals and society. And then let's have this gentleman here.
Hello. What could we do to try to educate the children to become more resilient to what they're going to face as they grow older through social media exposure?
Okay, so building skills in individuals, particularly their resilience. Let's take one more question. There was a chap at the chap right at the back there. Yes, just you. Yeah, yes, you.
Hey, my name is Karthik. I'm a research assistant from CNW NHS Trust. How can we increase the research? So what can the government do? What can we do? Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, so maybe Javid first, just around, I suppose, combining question 2 and 4 about what, apart from government, what can society and individuals do? What can civil society do to improve social media experiences?
So I think there's a lot we can do, but recognizing that no one individual, no one organization can do it all. So it's a collective responsibility that we have. But individually, we all have a contribution to make to it. So, there'll be a lot of parents in the room. There'll be people who know young people, related to them or otherwise, and so on, and others who aspire to have young people in their families. So we've all got a responsibility, and we've all got to wake up to this. That's the first thing. Raising our awareness levels to this issue, and not burying our heads in the sand and ignoring it. So the example I gave earlier about, buying these phones for our kids, that's not going to stop. The desire to buy and the demand and the marketing is so strong, it's going to happen. And we're lucky we know how to use one of these, and there are kids who are carrying 3 at one time. Right? An example of parents, and I'm a parent and I'm a complete failure at this as well. I mean, how many parents in the room know their teenage children's passwords to their smartphone, their iPad, or their computer? Nobody put their hand up, right? So, why am I not surprised by that? Right? Try and get a password off a teenager, it's like World War III. And then we go, suddenly they're very aware of their rights, freedom, all of that stuff. They don't know anything about anything else, but rights around sharing that kind of information. There's a responsibility there, I think, that we all have to educate ourselves. Now, the government, the system has a right to help you, has a duty rather, to help you with that. When it comes to children and young people and parents in particular, there's something really good going on in schools now, I think. It's very controversial for some, and this is the relationships, health and sex education curriculum. But I'm a supporter of that, because I think actually when you look at the content of what is being proposed, and remembering that schools is the place where you attract the mass audience. That's where 95% plus of young people are going to be day in, day out. It is the only way to reach them, to help them be more aware of the risks of online activity through the school curriculum is a real positive, because they will develop the skills and the knowledge and the understanding themselves in a way that currently I think kids are just stumbling through. And if you've got some mates who show you how to use it, they may be showing you stuff that you shouldn't be touching, and on the other hand it may be positive as well. You just don't know, and your parents don't know anyway. Schools have a responsibility, I think, not just with the children that they come directly into contact with, but the community as well, to help educate families, parents, adults. So the point is, that's our responsibility. Raise our awareness, raise our knowledge base, be aware of the risks, give our kids the opportunities, because that question about, why do it? If you don't believe in 24-hour connectivity, I think the answer is that it's a great enabler as well of learning. You have learning at your fingertips. When many of us were young, you needed to do some research. You went to a library to get out a book, and if you were lucky, there was still one there that you wanted. That's how you did your research. If it wasn't, you had to wait a week. And now, within seconds, you can research virtually any topic that you want. And I wouldn't want to take that away from young people, I think. It's the way to be. And that world is a village kind of model of worldwide connections are really important. Great, powerful learning. We don't want to take that away, but raise our awareness of the risks.
And Catherine, to you, so how can you build resilience, the question there?
So sort of leading on from Javid's point, but I think schools are the main point to source of contact to increase resilience within young people around social media, because we can use assemblies, we can use police visits, we can use picture books from any age to help teach children about how to stay resilient and safe online.
Okay, Barnardo?
Yeah, so again, I agree with a lot of what was said, except privacy. So all my kids know my password, but I haven't got a clue what theirs are. But one of the things we put it into our report is that parents often don't think about what they're posting about their children, putting up images that the children might not agree with or want there. And so I do think it's important that parents also ask children if they're okay about posting things about them in this age of, sort of a lack of privacy. So I think that's important. But it's got to be a public health approach. And, as Javid was saying, it's got to be across the whole of society. It's got to be integrated. It's got to start at age 0. It's got to start from the womb. because if we are to build healthy, resilient children, it's got to start at that point. So I'm pleased that the government NHS 10-year plan talks about a 0 to 25 approach across the lifespan. It talks about integration, so it's not just about specialist mental health services, because we can't work without people like yourselves, the third sector, without schools, without social care. So all of us need to be working together from a very early age, and helping support parenting from a very early age is so important, and supporting parents with mental health difficulties. There's loads of research out there to demonstrate that if parents have got mental health difficulties, that's got really serious knock-on effects on their own children. So we need to be picking that up and supporting that really early on. And then promoting balanced lifestyles, both within parents, within families, and also at schools and society level. So things like exercise, that mile a day exercise program in schools is a fantastic example of initiative. It doesn't actually cost anything, and it's really great for kids. So in terms of you want to have a healthy child, you need to have exercise, you need to have enough sleep, so screens out of your bedroom, and they need to have a decent diet, and they need to have activities. And again, it's the poorest children who are disproportionately affected there. And then research funding is massively important as well. And another thing to say, there isn't enough research funding out there, so as a college we are calling for a levy on the social media companies to put forward to independent research, so researchers can examine what's going on here, and that isn't going to be interfered with by the social media companies, because we do need to understand a lot more about not just how much that people are on screens, because that isn't the most important question. It's what young people are doing on screens, how they're interacting with screens, which bits help, which bits hinder for which young people. And that's very complex, nuanced research, and we desperately need more funding for that. And again, over a period of time, so we need to track these children over time.
Thank you, Bernardo. Okay, so for this very final round, we're going to just flip it around. So we're going to have a reverse Q&A. So I'm going to ask each of the panellists to ask you, the audience, a question. And then if you feel like answering that question, please put your hand up. So Catherine, if I may, can I start with you? Question that you want to ask the audience.
So, do you think people in government understand how influential social media is to young people?
Okay, so have a think if that's something that you want to answer. Bernardo, is there a question that you want to ask?
Should we be regulating social media at the expense of freedom of expression?
Okay, so that balance between regulation and freedom, how do we get the right balance? And Javid?
So it's a question to the parents in the room. What kind of impact do you think screen time has on your children? We've talked a little bit about it. How do you think it affects your kids?
Great. Anyone want to answer any of those three questions? So we'll start with the gentleman right at the back here. Yes, you. Yeah, this one here just sat down. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'll answer Catherine's questions about whether government understands how social media works. I think all of us would kind of be aware of how last year when Facebook went to Senate hearing Mark Zuckerberg, some of the senators were quite clueless about how Facebook worked. So I think there is this age gap where you see some of the Tory MPs, or even just MPs in general, trying to portray this image of themselves on social media with their dogs and whatever. And I like dogs, there's nothing wrong with them. What I'm saying is just they just don't seem to understand the impact of it on young people, because their way of it is just how they're trained by their staff, unfortunately. And in terms of policies, there's not much discussions about it as well. There's not much involvement from young people that I hear on panels where government's debating young people's lives on social media. I know a friend who actually, unfortunately, committed himself in front of a truck because his girlfriend broke up with him and he just couldn't take it anymore, and he gave it up all on social media and said, this is why I'm doing it. So I think, giving from personal experience, from personal friend's life that he lost, politicians can do more and they should do more, but to do that they need to speak to young people like Catherine to understand where they can start, because unfortunately they have, like I said, their own way of doing things, and going forward with how quickly social media is changing, it's just not going to work.
Yeah. Okay, and thank you for that question. And sorry to hear that very distressing story about your friend. Any other answers that people want to have? So this lady here.
Javed's question, actually, and from a parenting perspective, but my head teacher, Catherine, has worked in my school for the last year with children, so she's met the policeman this week. We've been WhatsApping and digging down, but it is about keeping the whole agenda of social media very, very active and building that into the curriculum. It is there coming through with the PSHE curriculum, talking about it every day. We've produced a watch out book that Catherine is involved in about mental well-being as well, and knowing who to turn to when something feels right or wrong, whether it's in the real world or online, and allowing children to have a greater conversation with those who can protect them. What happens in things like YouTube, they are almost so normalized, it's almost so normal for them to see inappropriate things, see inappropriate clips. So much is entering their life that is confusing or difficult or damaging, but I think it absolutely needs to filter into education. We are a trailblazer school, as I mentioned to Javed, which we now have a full-time pastoral care lead who is, I'd like to say, is available 24/7. She does go home, but but it is so that's not a teacher, that she is there every day to meet with children's queries, families. We put on safeguarding training for parents around social media, and they think they know everything, but every time the police come in, there's a new app, a new dangerous place, online grooming, potential for county lines, all sorts of things. And Javed is so right that children who have already got trauma or neglect or vulnerability are so much at risk that role for the designated mental health lead has to be high profile. It has to be, because they will often get disclosures or all sorts of other things coming their way, and it must be, after the head, of course, the second most important job in the school, because you...
Thank you. And then finally, Bernardka's question. Is there anyone who would like to answer that? So let's have this gentleman here.
Hi. So should we regulate social media? I think it's inevitable that that's the course of action that we're going to see over the next 10, 15 years or so. I think the real question is, how far should we regulate it, and where do we draw the balance? I mean, we've seen quite recently social media entrepreneurs answering to select committees on issues that there's been going on their platforms. So I do think we ought to regulate social media, but I just don't know to what extent we're going to do that. And of course, this is where the point you've been discussing comes in. We need to conduct more research. We need to know what are the areas that are contentious, how far we should regulate, what is important and what is not. But I do believe that regulating social media will happen eventually.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's carry on the conversation outside. We're going to have a quick drink and toilet break before the Secretary of State comes to deliver the Barnardo's annual lecture. But before we do that, I want to say a big thanks to Bernardo, Javed and Catherine for their contributions. If they can give them a round of applause. So we'll be back here in just over 10 minutes. So if you'd like to go outside, quick drink, quick toilet. If you want to speak to anyone about Bright Blue, there's...
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming back in really quickly. And let me formally welcome you now to a very exciting part of the evening, which is the Barnardo's annual lecture. At Barnardo's, we've been around a very long time, 153 years. And I'm sure over those decades there was a Barnardo's lecture, an annual lecture, but I don't know. Anyway, we began this last year because we thought this was something that, in terms of Barnardo's contribution to knowledge, to understanding, to intelligence, to gathering the evidence from around the country, and then being able to present key messages to very important audiences like yourselves, but also very importantly, getting really important people and giving them a chance, a platform to share their thoughts in the Barnardo's annual lecture. So welcome, and thank you for joining us. Thank you especially to Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. I'll say a little bit more about him in a moment, for agreeing to deliver the lecture. You are the second, I said, deliverer of such a lecture.
I'm just improving.
This may lead, this may lead to even greater heights for you, we hope. Maybe not the one you tried to reach a few days ago, but there is hope. There is hope. And you have our very best wishes on that. So, Barnardo's, you and the audience will know a lot about Barnardo's, of course, but just to recap, we are the oldest and the largest national children's charity in the United Kingdom. We work across all 4 nations and have been doing so for 153 years. In the last 12 months, we supported around 300,000 children, young people, their families, parents, carers, through a whole range of programs, over 1,000 different programs, in fact. And that size and scale, you know, it's only possible because we have 20,000 amazing volunteers and over 8,000 paid staff. But really, for us, it's not just about those numbers is what really matters. It's the knowledge and the understanding that we develop about the plight of vulnerable young people in this great country of ours. A country that has over 4 million children and young people living in poverty, where 1 in 8 children and young people suffer a mental health issue, where young people are waiting an extortionate amount of time before they get the support that they need, and particularly in mental health services. That just isn't good enough. We have a responsibility at Barnardo's to raise those issues. Parliamentarians have a responsibility to listen to the issues and do something about it. And some of them are doing something about it. We've recently conducted some research in Barnardo's where we asked our frontline staff, 80 frontline practitioners, about what they knew about our service users and the kinds of issues that they were presenting, particularly around the use of social media and internet and the impact on young people's mental health. And remember, the young people that we support are by and large young people who've already experienced trauma of various types in their life. That's why they've come into contact with Barnardo. So these aren't just general young people, these are vulnerable young people. And the findings of the report are really quite interesting. So firstly, the young children and young people are experiencing harm online at a much younger age than you might have expected. So 5 to 10-year-olds are being exposed to harmful, inappropriate materials online. 11 to 15-year-olds are experiencing cyberbullying. 17 to 19-year-olds are trying to depict a perfect life, the perfect body image, and that is affecting them in all sorts of ways. But our message, Matt, is that the internet is not a bad thing. You know, we think those kind of descriptors are too simplistic. There are great strengths from the internet and social media, particularly for vulnerable young people, if used in the right way, in terms of the isolation and the loneliness that they may feel, the connectivity that they need within their social networks. Those are all great positives, but there are great risks as well. Many, many risks are noticed by the general public, by parents concerned about them. The audience here have been talking about that before you arrived today, about what it's like, the lack of understanding that we have about the impact of social media and internet in young people's lives, the lack of research that exists, and that we all have a responsibility to do something about it. The government needs to commit, we would argue, to conducting that research so that we can find out more whether there are causal effects or not. And so we don't have to rely on anecdotal evidence. And that's why we chose the title of the lecture today, Left to Their Own Devices, Young People, Social Media and Mental Health. And as I say, I'm delighted that Matt Hancock has agreed to deliver the lecture today. And Matt has been a fantastic champion, I might add, for these issues at the heart of government, both at the DCMS, where he was the Secretary of State there, where I know I and many other representatives across the voluntary sector, in particular in the children's sector, really celebrated Matt's contribution to the debate there. He brought a freshness, a great inspiring message that we hadn't seen for quite a while. And we were quite disappointed when you got promoted and moved to the Health and Social Care Department because of your contribution at DCMS. But I know that you've continued to champion this cause in particular. We've seen some real breakthroughs under your leadership when it comes to improving protection for children's well-being and mental health online. And we want to see more of that. And the government in general has made a number of welcome proposals which we believe the next Prime Minister must see through. And we are worried. We are worried that the next Prime Minister might not. Things could change. And we really want these proposals to find the light of day. So the Online Harms White Paper, for example, promises to regulate the internet. This is an opportunity to become a world leader in online safety, we believe, with a duty on tech firms, a regulator that has teeth and sanctions for those that don't follow the rules. We've just recently seen the announcement for training for teachers in schools, which we warmly welcome. We also have the Green Paper, which promised early intervention in schools. And this is a huge step forward, but so far, it only reaches a small proportion of schools. We need to go much further and much faster, and rolling out the program to every classroom as soon as possible. We've seen the Relationships, Sex and Health Education Initiative, and I think this is also a huge step forward. Teaching young people about positive relationships helps them identify sexual abuse early. It helps prevent harmful sexual behavior, domestic abuse in future. It helps young people come to terms with their identity also. But it must be rolled out effectively with high quality resources in tandem with the policy. And with all these advances, we very much hope that what has begun under the current government continues in the ensuing days when a change of leadership takes place. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that kind and increasingly warm introduction. And what you said was very touching, because I do care deeply about this subject, and I care that we get it right. And I'm sorry that I've been delayed this evening, and thank you for your forbearance. I was delayed because of 2 votes in the House of Commons on HS2, and as a strong supporter of HS2, I was very keen to be there. And anyway, it was a 3-line whip, so I had no choice. An Irishman, a Barbadian, and a Kiwi. Sorry, there isn't a punchline to this joke, but I did want to talk briefly about the England cricket team, who I also met just on the way over here at Downing Street. Our brilliant England captain, our star bowler, star batsman, and this entire generation of the England cricketers who come from so many different backgrounds, who all play for our country. And these guys, just like the England Women's World Cup team from 2 years ago, are all role models to so many boys and girls around the country. And I think that it's a sign of how far we've come since Norman Tebbett's infamous cricket test, that nobody cares where you come from, only where you want to call home. And I hope that we call it a new cricket test, that we are a meritocracy as a country wherever you come from. And I thought that it was worth starting by mentioning the England cricket team, not only to cheer everybody up, but also because we have to make sure that we remember what the recent past was like when you want to decide on decisions about the future. Our sporting role models are a brilliant reflection of this country and what it looks like now and is now. And this itself is a huge sign of progress. But I think we can take that analysis also into the space that we're talking about tonight. Because things weren't always better for children and teenagers before smartphones and social media. We often discuss the impact of social media and the challenges that it brings. But as you rightly, and I'm glad you mentioned in your introduction, we also must remember the great advances that it brings. By most metrics, life has never been better. Smoking is down, alcohol misuse is down, drug abuse is down. More young people are staying in school and going to university than ever before. You see, the thing is, no matter how much we care about improving our country, we've always got to base those improvements on an honest assessment of where we are now. But an honest assessment means also reflecting that each age brings new challenges, and our task is to rise to those new challenges and to harness new changes for the benefit of our society. This afternoon, some of the biggest social media companies in the world, including Facebook and Instagram, Pinterest, Google, YouTube, Tumblr, Snap, all came together at the department. And the Matt Hancock app was also represented. And what we discussed is exactly what we're talking about tonight. Young people, social media, and the impact on mental health. And the word that kept coming up in the meeting, and the word that keeps coming up in this area, and not just from me, was responsibility. So I think that it is clear that the penny has now dropped. Social media companies get that they have a social responsibility and that we all have a shared responsibility for the health and well-being of our children. This was the third social media summit that I've called this year. And so far, we've managed to get the big tech firms, and that includes Twitter, to agree to remove suicide and self-harm content, to start addressing the spread of anti-vaccination misinformation. Instagram have introduced a new anti-bullying tool, and they've all repeated to me that they recognize that they have a duty of care to their users, particularly children and young people. And I think that this debate has moved a long way in a few short years. I mentioned Twitter. It was a very amusing testament of the impact of Twitter on modern life, that when Twitter went down briefly on Thursday night for a couple of hours, the MP's WhatsApp group went absolutely wild. Colleagues of mine didn't know what to do or how to spend their evening. Anyway, don't worry, it went back up shortly afterwards and they all started telling you what they thought. The next step from the work that we've been doing is research. Today we agreed that we must build a scientifically rigorous evidence base so we can better understand the health impact of social media and so we can better identify what more we need to do to keep our children safe online. We'll use the data that social media companies hold for social good. Because while we've made significant progress in these past few months, there is still much, much more to do. And ultimately, we need to ensure that we allow those who are expressing themselves on social media as a cry for help to make that cry, whilst not subjecting others to the damaging impact of viewing self-harm material or material that promotes suicide. And I've made it crystal clear that if they don't collaborate, then we will legislate. Today, we agreed the start of a new strategic partnership between the Samaritans and the Big Six: Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Google, YouTube, and Twitter. We want the social media companies to contribute at least £1 million to get this partnership off the ground. The government's playing a leading role and bringing the partnership together and also contributing funding. Our mission will be to follow the evidence, develop a scientifically based understanding of what the challenge is, what resources are needed, the support, the guidelines we need to establish and better protect children and young people online. And the key will be to ensure that we have a clinically credible analysis of what should and shouldn't be online, and to ensure that when social media companies want to take down content that is harmful or are required to take down content that is harmful, the boundary of what should and shouldn't be online is defined by clinical standards. There's a clear need for a partnership here to make sure that we get that line right. Ultimately, technology isn't the problem. Ultimately, technology isn't the problem. Cars don't kill people because of a design flaw. People die in car crashes most of the time due to human error. The challenge with social media is also a human challenge. Now, I'm well known for my love of technology, and you mentioned it in your introduction. I'm well known for caring about driving technological upgrades through the NHS, and before that, across the economy as Culture Secretary. But the reason that I care about the technology is because I care about people, and ultimately harnessing people to harness technology to improve people's lives. That is the challenge that we face. And the challenge that we face online, and with respect to the impact of social media on children, is to ask the question, are the humans going to do the right thing? Are social media companies going to play their part by making their services safer? Are governments going to hold those companies to account and ensure that we have a framework of norms and laws to make it easier for everybody to do the right thing? How are we going to support parents and carers to keep their children safe and healthy online? Essentially, how are we all going to live up to our responsibilities? And I believe that we will, for two reasons. First, history shows us that new technologies sometimes develop faster than our ability fully to understand their impact. But when we do catch up, we act successfully. It took a century of speed limits and vehicle inspections and traffic lights and drink drive laws and seatbelt legislation to make driving a car as safe as it is today. And now, per mile driven, cars have never been safer. But we're still not done, because driverless cars will be the next step. Proof that progress is both advanced by understanding and improving the technology itself. But of course, that progress is never complete. I take inspiration from the first modern labour law in this country, introduced by a Conservative, Robert Peel, father of the great Sir Robert Peel, one of our greatest prime ministers. The 1802 Health and Morals of Apprentices Act. I can see the health bit, the morals is quite fun, isn't it? That act recognised that cotton mill owners needed better to protect the children working in this newfangled machinery, in this newfangled thing called a factory. Now, it took a few more decades and a few more factory acts before child labour was outlawed altogether. But that first factory act, introduced by a Conservative mill owner, started the course of gradual improvements to make the world of work safer for children, women, and men. This task of harnessing a new technology for the benefit of society does not take one act of Parliament or one change in a rule. It is a constant effort to ensure that our rulebook stays up to date, to allow for the great innovations of our age, yet also to ensure that the benefit of that innovation is brought to the whole of society. And the history of technology and the history of humanity itself is one of gradual and constant improvements. Now, gradual does not mean slow. It doesn't mean that we need to wait decades for changes to happen. And indeed, part of the problem often is that regulation and legislation is slow to keep up with the pace of change in society. The pace of technological transformation is faster now than at any point in history. And indeed, you could argue that it is the slowest rate of technological change that we will likely witness in the rest of our lifetimes, because that change is accelerating. And look at it this way. Facebook is 15 years old now, which in tech years is about 46. They've even appointed Nick Clegg, and you don't get more grown up than Sir Nick. This technology is maturing. There's more middle-aged people now using Facebook than teenagers. And through improving our understanding and improving technology, we can make it safer for everyone. So that's the first reason that I have confidence that we will get this right. But it requires the constant effort to upgrade the laws and norms by which we live to make sure we harness innovation and we harness it in a way that benefits society. Second, mental health. Thanks to the actions of this Prime Minister and her predecessor, mental health is finally being talked about and is taken as seriously as physical health. I'm delighted that today the frontrunner to be our next Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, vowed to build on that proud legacy by working with employers to support staff with mental ill health and make sure they get the help they need to recover and thrive at work. We've started a fundamental shift in how we think about mental health in this country, and the approach the NHS is taking to preventing, treating, and supporting good mental health in the future. This fundamental shift is important, but yet again, it is by no means complete. We've put a record amount of funding into mental health services, but there is so much more to do. And I think it's very important that when we talk about the impact of social media and the well-being of young people, we talk about it in this wider context of good mental health. How do we promote and encourage good mental health and see our health, both our physical health and our mental health, as an asset that we should all nurture? The third and final thing I want to touch on tonight is resilience, which is another way of saying prevention, the guiding principle of the NHS over the next decade. How can we help people, particularly children and young people, to become more resilient in the first place? This isn't about telling people to toughen up, emphatically not. It's about teaching people the cognitive and emotional skills that they need to deal with adversity. It's about promoting positive mental health and preventing problems from causing illness. Because life will throw at you challenges, times of stress and adversity, losing a job, divorce, bereavement. It's how people respond, it's how resilient we are that ultimately determines the impact on our mental health. A child development expert, Professor Anne Maston, put it brilliantly. Resilience does not come from rare and special qualities, but from the everyday magic of ordinary, normative human resources in the brains, minds, and bodies of children. It is everyday magic, but it is not automatic. Resilience isn't a fixed attribute. It's something we can teach. It's something that can be learnt. It's something that must be nurtured. It's an essential life skill that we should equip every young person with so they can meet challenges head on and face adversity, learn and grow and improve as a person. I'm delighted that we're working with colleagues in the Department for Education to equip and empower children from a young age with this essential life skill. Teaching resilience along with the self-respect and self-worth that comes with it. Learning about the importance of honesty and courage and kindness and generosity and trustworthiness and justice. Learning about these values to live by. It's vital to our mental health. And we're also teaching children about the dangers of fake news and why truth matters, whether it's falsehoods and about vaccines or falsehoods about people. And as a parent, I want to protect my children from the dangers of this world, but I know I can't be with them every minute of the day. And I don't think they'd very much like it if I tried. But I hope that I can help to teach them, to prepare them for the challenges that they will face in future. And of course, you at Barnardo's do this to the children in your care all of the time. As parents, as a society, we can't remove every challenge, but we can teach young people how to overcome them, how to cope with adversity, how to become more resilient. It comes down to this: responsibility. Everybody playing their part. Social media companies, government, parents, carers. Research, building the evidence base to improve our understanding and improve this new technology. Resilience, teaching the right way to respond to challenges. That's how we protect our children. And it's how we build a safer, healthier world for them to grow up in. And it is an area in which we can succeed. We are leading the world, and we must not fail if we're going to ensure that the next generation grows up to live the fulfilling and happy lives that we all want to see. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, Secretary, thank you very much. A very broad range of issues, topics covered there, from the world view to the UK view, from government responsibility to the private sector businesses, the tech giants, the public sector as well. We touched on legislation and enforcing legislation and accountability. Talked about children and young people themselves, the schools that they go to and the families, and the all-round responsibility that we have around resilience. A lot of that will have resonated with many people in the audience and actually aligns extremely well with the part of the conference that you weren't even here for. So you've been very well briefed. These are the things that people wanted to talk about. So you've got a little bit of time to take questions. I know there's a risk of being whisked off for a vote, so we won't hold you for too long. But if we could have a show of hands of people indicate that they've got a question. I'm going to take 3 questions in one go if I can. If you could introduce yourself and try and be as brief and pithy as you can in the question. There's a gentleman at the back, just there in the center with the beard. Yeah, that's you. That's you. And then there's the lady there with the glasses, the second one. and a woman here at the front on the front row. Those three to start with, please.
Hi, my name is Raghav. I'm a secondary school teacher. I just wanted to ask, given that it's in the interest of social media companies to incentivize people to stay on and be addicted as much as possible, given that that maximizes their profits with advertisers, how do you recommend effective regulation, particularly national regulation, in the context of an international world in which social media companies operate on an internet that does not have any borders?
Thank you. It's a really good question. Are we taking all three? Okay.
Yeah, can we?
Yes, I'll take notes.
A bit quicker.
Thank you. Thanks for your speech. In your speech, you mentioned some analogies in relation to previous technological developments, and I was wondering whether this is particularly relevant given that social media change the way we operate culturally as well. So
yes.
I was wondering whether drawing an analogy with a car, for instance, or a seatbelt is very practical in this case, given the transformative nature of social media. And related to this point, whether regulation and stricter regulation could be, in a case, essential to make the most of social media, and how, in particular, you think regulation could be applied.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then on the front.
Hello, I'm a journalist and an advocate for mental health as well, and I agree with the fact that we all have a responsibility to play, but also there are young people who don't have families, who come from backgrounds who don't have that support. I want to see what the government is doing to help those people, because I had somebody on the programme who was an ex-offender who committed knife crime and had no family support whatsoever.
Yeah.
But also in terms of how are you going to monitor and regulate with these companies, because they all have a responsibility to play, and you've said that you're working with these 6 organisations, but I'd like to hear how you're doing that. Thank you.
Okay, well, they're great questions and very connected, and I'll touch on the individual points, but there's one theme connecting through, which is a question that I think we have raised as a society and are now addressing, which comes down, sir, to the premise of your question, the first question, which is, given that the social media companies are global and the internet is essentially global, how can we as a nation state have a say? And the answer is, very simply, that the rules of this country are made by that building over there. Currently subject also to EU law, but let's not get onto that subject. And we as a society govern how we run ourselves. And there was this attitude a few years ago that basically the social media companies are so big nobody could ever get them to do anything. And when we wanted to, we'd sort of ask politely. And it's just not valid. The rules there's all sorts of rules which are defined within our jurisdiction and that global companies have to abide by. Whether, even in old technology, the rules around the safety of machinery are British or European rules, even for global companies. And they have to abide by them. So I just reject the premise that just because they're global, therefore we shouldn't have our say. Now, having said that, the best way to make changes often is global and very much in cooperation and collaboration. And I'll take Instagram as a case in point. A few months ago, we called on Instagram to change its rules around promotion of self-harm imagery, and they did. And they didn't just change their rules for the UK, they changed their rules globally. And that shows that we can take action here that has a beneficial impact globally, but we're also clear that while we can't and we wouldn't want to regulate globally, we can ensure we have a set of rules that protects children here. Now, the best way to do that is in concert with our partners around the world, but we should, as a society, reserve the right through our legitimate democratic processes to make these decisions. And that's an answer for several parts of the question, but specifically, you also asked the point about children in care and about the link to serious violence. I was at the serious violence task force in Downing Street with the Prime Minister today. And it was very interesting listening to the young people who attend that task force, how the link to a stable home life and the link from that to the attraction of membership of gangs was something that they brought up to us, and the evidence is very clear. There's a whole set of, I mean, that's for another lecture, maybe next year's lecture should be on that, or probably it's more urgent. There's a whole series of work going into ensuring that the support is there, and it's something that my colleagues in the Department for Education work very closely with Barnardo's on. And now I've forgotten the specifics of the middle question. Oh yes, is it unfair, because social media and the internet is transformative, to compare it to cars? Perfect, yes. You're right, I was wrong. Cars are, the impact of the car is much smaller than the impact of the internet, I think. I was just trying to make a point that you don't solve these things in one go as a policymaker. You solve them by gradual improvement. And the Industrial Revolution, where I started with the Factory Acts, was about as big as this Industrial Revolution. Maybe bigger, maybe smaller, but it was still very significant. And that we had to keep moving with over time. That's the point.
Thank you. Right. Hands again, please. So the young man in the corner there can go first, and the woman on the third row here, and then right at the back, the man with the glasses. You want to go first?
Hi. Hi, my name is Tommy. I'm 13 from Clapham, and I'd first very quickly like to thank you for your time as Health Secretary, particularly the NHS long-term plan, which I think has done a lot to develop progress with mental health. But the main question that I'd like to ask you is, you said that you had a meeting with the big six of social media companies. How will the government be able to reach out to maybe smaller social media companies? As like we said, some of the people in the conference before, there are new apps and new technologies being developed every single day. So how could we keep up with all of them?
Great question.
Hi, my name's Brooke. I work for a public affairs agency. I want to ask a question. It slightly deviates from social media, but the harms are all the same. So in light of the World Health Organization's decision to name game disorder as an official medical condition, do you see it as the role of government to commission research into the prevalence of the disorder, and also research that looks into what is an appropriate time that someone should be playing video games and be on social media apps for different ages?
Thank you.
I haven't seen that ruling, so but anyway, I'll
whilst you're looking it up.
Yeah.
Hello, Mike Wright from The Telegraph. Ian Russell, the father of Molly, has said in his submission on the white paper that he feels that as long as the advice that social media companies get that informs their policy is directly funded by the social media companies, it is open to, quote, manipulation and cherry picking. And what he asked for in his submission on the white paper was a system whereby there is an independent panel of experts set up, funded by a levy that breaks the link directly with the social media companies, whose impartial advice is then enforced by the regulator that we assume is coming. I was wondering what you made of those proposals from Ian.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, firstly, the point about smaller social media companies, Tommy, brilliant question, and very important, because ultimately we need a level playing field. Now there has to be a de minimis, because social media companies can pop up all the time. You know, the Matt Hancock app, brilliant as it is. You know, I've joked before that the world is split into two types of people. People who are on the Matt Hancock app and people who are not on the Matt Hancock app yet. And there's but you know, it probably doesn't require the same level of oversight as Twitter. But nevertheless, setting rules and norms and knowing where the boundary is between what is right to have up and what is wrong to have up, that is important for all social media companies of all scale. This is covered. But if I respond to the question from the Telegraph, the work that we're doing now is being done by the Samaritans, and their academic panel of clinicians are assessing what is the scientific evidence behind what is right to take down. Now, I am absolutely clear that this must be done right, and I'll look very carefully at the proposals that Molly's father has made, because he's been incredibly brave in adding his voice to this debate with the clarity that he has. But for the work that we're doing right now, you could not have a more robust and independent group than the Samaritans leading that work, and their independence is beyond question. Making sure that that is always sustained is obviously a very important part of getting the details of this right. And the final question about the WHO, I'm afraid I haven't seen that today, and so I'll reserve my comment other than to say that we need to, video games are both bring joy to many people, but also need to be used in a responsible way. But I haven't seen the judgment, so I can't say anything more than that, I'm afraid.
One more round, yeah. And I have just downloaded your app, by the way.
Brilliant.
It works.
There you go.
Quick show of hands. Last
What,
round
for who's on my app?
So, a young man there in the corner, one right at the back, and then one on the second row here. Unfortunately, I do apologise for those that couldn't fit in.
Hi, my name is Sachin. I'm part of Penrose Health. We run a group of GP practices in South London. Thank you for your talk. Just a quick question on mental health and primary care. So we're finding a real increase in incidence of mental health cases across the demographic, but obviously particularly in young people.
Yeah.
One of the solutions we found is to introduce specialist mental health nurses in primary care.
Yeah.
Would the government sort of consider introducing more mental health support within GP practices?
Yeah.
Thank you.
John Mason, psychiatrist. I was wondering, do you see social media as an opportunity to, in terms of preventative work, to have more feedback from patients' experiences of mental health services, such as inpatient services? And perhaps it's an opportunity for people to have their voice heard, which unfortunately sometimes is difficult in the inpatient kind of system, and maybe have more progress on that front.
Yeah. And just here on the second row.
My name's Melissa Loosemore. I'm the head teacher of Row Green Junior School in Kingsbury in Brent. And my question is concerning the Green Paper of 2017, where it stated that schools were going to be incentivised to have a designated senior lead for mental health. And I'm making an assumption that incentivise means to have some money, because we haven't got much.
Okay, three really good questions, and again, all connected in a different way to the previous questions. We are rolling out more mental health support workers, and the incentives as described. They are currently in about 10% of schools, but we need to roll that out across the country. So it is coming, but it's actually connected to the first question from Sachin, which is that our mental health workforce needs to expand. We need more psychiatrists, we need more mental health nurses in particular. And of all the shortages of clinical staff in the NHS, and as the NHS grows, there's a demand for more people. One of the biggest is in mental health nurses. I very strongly support the inclusion of more mental health nurses in primary care. I think that the new primary care networks, which now are essentially grouping, GP practices are essentially grouped together into groups that serve around 50,000 people rather than being individual practices. And that will allow them to be able to have a more multidisciplinary team, more flexibility in how they employ the workforce. And I hope it works for you, but it is very much designed with a response to your question in mind. And the final point on feedback of mental health services, feedback on the impact of mental health services, especially for those most in need in inpatient settings as well, is and the fact that social media allows people's voices to be heard. Given I've just had a text to say that I've got to go and vote in the House of Commons, this is a brilliant place to end, because I want to just end on this point, which is that we spend a lot of time rightly concerned with the negative impact of new technology, and it is our job as a society, as a government, to mitigate the negative impact of new technology. But by God, this new technology also has big upsides too, in tackling loneliness, in bringing people together, in allowing people to cry for help, in allowing whistleblowers, in allowing people to explain what is happening and hope that those in authority can see and do something about it. And the connectivity that all of us have been using throughout this meeting, including me whilst I've been speaking, this would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, and is a powerful force for good. And our task, and the task that I tried to address my own remarks to, is how do you harness that force for good whilst also mitigating and accepting that there are downsides to it as well. I'm well known in Westminster for being a huge enthusiast for tech. Ironically, I spend more time talking about the downsides of technology than about what's good about it, because so often it's very easy to say, well, that's great, terrific, big tick, let's move on. But we should, it's a good point to end to say that whilst we must rise to the challenge of the damage that can come through new technology, we also have it within our power as a world to use this technology to improve everyone's lives, and that's what we must go and do. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and thank you in particular to the Secretary of State for sharing his time and thoughts. I suppose what came through in the Secretary of State's lecture and the conference was firstly to be optimistic about the progress that has been made on many metrics in life, that life is better than it was in the past, including with social media. But, and there's always a but in these situations, there are challenges, and humans, the great problem solvers, have to put their mind to those challenges to fix them and make life better again. And as Matt, as the Health Secretary said, the challenges with social media, not necessarily the technology, but human use, or rather misuse of it, which seems to be the bigger problem. And there seems to be 4 key areas where there needs to be much more progress. The first on strengthening the evidence base around the effects on young people, and recognising really that there are differing impacts on different people. Also, secondly, that social media companies, as well as government, civil society and individuals themselves, have a role to play in improving the social media experience. Thirdly, I think, is around the importance of building resilience for young people, that adversity in life, unfortunately, is often inevitable, and we need to find ways of building young people's resilience for that. And the fourth, I suppose, is back to optimism, which is to recognise the great potential that social media can play, as well as the damage, particularly in bringing people who are often lonely into conversations that they wouldn't otherwise have, and particularly people into education or the labour market who wouldn't otherwise have that ability, practical ability to do so. So there are optimistic stuff as well as things that need to be addressed. So a final thanks to the Bright Blue team, particularly Veronica, for organising this very excellent conference. Thanks to Barnardo's and their team as well for partnering with us on it. Thank you to everybody here in engaging in a fantastic session with lots of good questions and answers, and some very impressive young people answering asking questions, who no doubt I think may be in the Secretary of State's position in some decades to come. If you want to find out more about Bright Blue, then do talk to one of our team who've got blue lanyards about the events that we hold, becoming a member, etc. And please do take away the magazines that we've left on the table. So, if we could have a round of applause for the Secretary of State.